Ah yes, mermaids. The fantasy of every 5-year-old girl the world over, and the savior of Disney as a company so that it could become the megalomaniacal multi-billion-dollar superpower that it is today. For these reasons, I absolutely detest them. But since mermaids are an interesting study which spans multiple generations and dozens of world's mythologies, I can't help but to make a video on them attempting to make heads or fishtails of all of this nonsense. For those of you who somehow don't know what a mermaid is by now, it's this thing. Nice, very nice, alright, I can get behind. Oh my god, where's the snatch? Believe it or not, some people actually choose to fetishize these things. It's weird. The history of mermaids goes back roughly 3,000 years to the Assyrian Empire. Centered around the city of Hierapolis, there existed a certain fertility goddess known as the city's Baalet, or female lord, more properly known as Atargatis. Now, while there are some who believe that she is the evolution of the water goddess Atirat, the mythology states that she was originally a priestess, sometimes a queen, who one day got the hots for a young man named Ichthys, which seems understandable since the Assyrian priestly class was nothing like the Christian priests and they got down with their bad selves whenever the hell they wanted to. Except Ichthys' name means fish, meaning that either this is a textbook example of foreshadowing, which could have been foreseen and therefore prevented, or the lady literally had sex with a fish, also making this the earliest known story of felching.
Armageddon!
After Atargatis gave birth to her daughter, she chucked the little puke out in the middle of the desert, where she intended to let it die, only for the child to be rescued and raised by doves? Okay. Anyway, that child would eventually become the queen of the whole damn empire known as Semiramis, but would never get the chance to meet dear old mom, for trying to sunbake her own child left Atargatis with an understandable amount of guilt, and so she tried to drown herself in the sea, only to emerge seconds later with the upper torso of a human woman, but the tail of a fish. Funny then that the very first mermaid is actually what we think of as a contemporary fish person as opposed to what we conceive of as a more modern interpretation of a mermaid as an eldritch abomination which looks to be more fish than human. However, this is actually an older interpretation than we might think, as the writings of Pliny the Elder describe their bodies as rough and scaled all over, implying that these weren't the sorts of fish ladies you wanted seducing you to the point of leaping overboard for them. Well, that was the popular interpretation of them up until the 5th century, where the bestiary physiologists seemed to go back to basis and referred to mermaids as wonderfully shaped as a maid from the navel up, and as a fish from the navel down. From the Middle Ages onwards, mermaids seemed to blend themselves in with mythological sirens, as their voices and beauty were, on more than one occasion, the reason behind the disappearance of lonely sailors, who were even believed to be the cause of entire shipwrecks. There may have been a kernel of truth to this, however, as during the Middle Ages to the late Renaissance period, there were multiple sightings of mermaids across all bodies of water. Most famously, Christopher Columbus reported seeing them as far out as the shores of the New World in 1493. Now, the explanation we're offered as to these sightings is merely a superstition-fueled eyewitness account of manatees. Now, this may make you think that there must have been some sort of mistake in the historical records. After all, if this is a beautiful sea maiden, then I'm the 1980s Chris Sarandon. However, in Columbus's defense, he did say that they were, quote, not half as beautiful as they are painted. Since then, most if not all of these sightings have been discredited as nothing more than a bunch of horny sailors mistaking various species of sea cow through wishful thinking as mermaids that they could, wait, they can't actually stick it in there anyhow. The best you'd get out of them is a blowy. Which was exactly the sort of behavior the medieval church, also known as the No Fun Police, tried to condemn, citing mermaids as nothing more than seductive evil spirits emblematic of vanity, lust, and, quote, the other perils of women. There's a slippery slope right there which leads to some sodomy. So remember kids, the quickest way to piss off Jesus is to hump a walrus. That's basically where the mythological development of mermaids ends for the Western world, minus one or two possible exceptions in the Nereids of Greek mythology or the Selkie of Celtic and Norse mythology, but those are kinda different and more often than not depicted that way due to modern pop culture slapping their names next to a painting of a medieval mermaid and just calling it a day. There are, however, tales from the Irish of mermaids called Benvery, but they are otherwise unremarkable save for one called Liban, a former human transformed into a mermaid after one of those pesky lake bursts drowns her whole family, only for her to seek refuge in an underwater chamber, only to emerge as a half-woman, half-salmon. Eventually, when Christian monks came to settle Ireland, they captured Liban in a fishing net and then somehow baptize her. Can you really baptize a fish? Also, please note that this video is not meant to be a comprehensive catalog of all mermaids in world folklore, as most of them are neutral or benevolent spirits who give you some good shit if you help them out in any way. This is merely to highlight some of what I have deemed to be more of the interesting ones. Like in Africa. This continent, often embarrassingly erroneously labeled as a country, is host to the unimaginatively named Mami Wata. It's literally translated to what it sounds like. She is a beautiful woman of noticeably lighter complexion, known for being exceptionally beautiful on the top side, but having a fishtail for a lower body. Mami Wata is a rather famous water spirit, as she is known throughout Africa in some way, shape, or form. What is fairly consistent about her is that she likes three things: material wealth, the snake which is often seen coiled around her tail, suggesting that Mami Wata possesses psychic powers, and sex. I can understand two of those things, but I must ask who would want to stick their dick into a... The sexual aspects of Mami Wata are seen as a potential trial of fidelity, as in Nigeria it is said that Mami Wata may present herself to a favorable man in the form of a decidedly beautiful woman whom, upon taking her up on this fornication, would reveal herself to the man and demand a complete and utter sexual compliance in exchange for a life of wealth and success. Otherwise, she would go full Fatal Attraction on his ass and lead him and his family into financial ruin. Specifically, financial ruin. It doesn't say that she kills them, which is weird. She is also known to kidnap swimmers and lead them to her underwater palace, where she holds them captive until they agree to join her cult, which is thought by some to be representative of the undertow caused by the ocean waves, which kills more people per year than pretty much everything else living in the water. Mami Wata is thought to be the amalgamation of several other African water spirits who were brought together, and had her skin significantly lightened by, the influence of the Europeans, suggesting that the cult of Mami Wata and subsequently her mermaid-like appearance is a fairly recent development. Scary as temptress mermaids we've covered thus far may be, have you ever wanted to taste one? Not like that, you horny bastard. Well, nobody loves fish more than the Japanese, and they don't care if that fish has a human face with a monkey's mouth. If it fits in a net, it's dinner, goddammit. Now, you might be wondering how it's possible for these people to come up with the idea of sea monkeys centuries before comic books started scamming kids out of their parents' money. Well, this is Japan. So, as you can probably imagine, some bored Japanese sailors would pass the time by cutting in half a monkey, then stitching its torso onto the tail of a fish, then went a step further and would make some extra money by selling them off to Dutch merchants as authentic mermaid specimens. And if you think, oh, well, our ancestors were smarter than this, there's no way that anyone actually thought that this was a real mermaid. One of them was brought to London by an American sea captain who bought it off of these schmucks, and then it was touted as London's greatest scientific sensation before it was bought by P.T. Barnum. Yes, that P.T. Barnum. And then put on display as the Fiji Mermaid, where people paid actual money to see this thing and came out thinking that they had just seen a real-life aquatic specimen. I wish I was kidding you. So, going back to the story which inspired this whole thing, the legend titled Hapiyaku Bikuni goes that the Ningyo of Japan are female water spirits who dwell deep beneath the surface, and while they were once captured by a fisherman/barbecue expert, all of his guests were a little weary of eating something that looked an exceptional lot like them, including the fisherman himself. However, the night before he decided to just get rid of the Ningyo, his young daughter decides that she wants to be exceptionally Asian that night and eats the fish meat, which causes her father to worry for her well-being. But he didn't realize that this was a divine fish person, and eating it gave the girl eternal youth and beauty, which allowed her to live and remarry up until she got tired of men and decided to become a Buddhist nun and subsequently ended her own life some 800 years later. Well, at least she tried. So what happened was that she sealed herself up in a cave near Wakasa Barack Obama and planted a tree near its entrance, instructing the villagers that once the tree withers, they can come in and collect her body. However, according to legend, she's still making them wait there as the tree is supposedly immortal now too. Similarly, the Jengu of Cameroon are fish ladies who cure illness and bless their worshippers with good luck. Acting sort of like Hermes, the Jengu are messenger spirits, carrying the pleas of mortal men and women who venerate them back to the gods. They are described as fishtail beings with a gap-toothed smile and thick woolly hair. Like most mermaids, the Jengu are thought to have a singular human origin point. So long ago, Mojili and another human by the name of Moto took a bet on who could build a longer-lasting fire. Moto, of course, won and was allowed to stay on land, whereas Mojili was forced to retreat into the sea and take up permanent residence, mothering the Cameroonian mermaids. Now, while you might expect that these gals would be a bit vengeful considering it was a mortal man who put them in this precarious position in the first place, there are other various ethnic groups and tribes throughout Cameroon who practice some sort of cult worship where they venerate the Jengu. Most prolific, and strange, amongst these rituals is the Liengu La Ndiva, a year-long ceremony which begins with a young girl suffering a fucking seizure. Then the medicine man speaks to her in a made-up language. It's actually made up, I'm not being racist. If she seems to understand any of it, the men of the village throw her out into the wilderness where she will be forced to survive by herself for a few months. If she makes it back to the village, she is baptized in the nearby river so that she may receive the water spirits into her body, where she is eventually fished out, unless they come across a crab, which is supposedly a sacred animal to the Jengu, and fishing it out of the water takes priority over the helpless seizure victim who was almost certainly malnourished after having to survive off the land for a few months at a time, who is just flailing out in the middle of the river because no one thought to give her a set of complimentary floaties. Still, at least it's nice to see people pay tribute to their archaic deities, which is more than can be said than the Inuit deity Sedna, a massive goddess who is believed to live under the surface of the ocean with the torso of a woman and the lower body of a seal? We'll still count it. Anyway, Sedna started out of her life as a mortal, yet a very pretty girl. Hey, that sounds familiar. Who gets herself kidnapped by some dickhead bird. Her father paddles out to the bird's island to go fetch his daughter, but on the way back, the bird whips up a terrible storm which threatens to capsize their boat. So, if you are in this precarious position, would you A. pray to whatever god you believe in to save your mortal soul, B. die alongside your daughter, valiantly preserving your dignity by trying to paddle your way back home until the bitter end, or C. say, fuck this, and completely ruin the point of coming out in the first place and throw your daughter into the sea to save your own skin? Obviously, the old man chose option A, and they lived happily ever after. Except this is mythology, and the actual story is a bit far more brutal than that, so the canon ending is option C, which is made all the worse by Sedna trying to climb back into the kayak, only to have her fingers chopped off by her father's paddle, which sunk to the bottom of the ocean along with Sedna herself, reincarnating themselves into the very first whales, seals, dolphins, and what have you. And Sedna's main body grew into an incredibly pissed off water goddess who would punish the mainland inhabitants with an even more vicious storm unless, once a year, the shamans dove down into the water to comb her miles and miles of unkempt hair, believed to just be seaweed. Which, yeah, I don't see any scuba diving shamans heading under the freezing water with giant hairbrushes every year, so I guess you're fucked, huh? And that's not even in a literal sense, as is the case in China. According to the Taiping Guangji, which is meant to be taken as a literal historical record, there exist these fish-like beings with human faces called Hairenyu, which apparently have identical reproductive organs to those of humans. So, wealthy widow and widowers used to keep these things in their koi ponds and would fish them out whenever they felt like it, so that they could... You know what? I don't need to spell everything out for you guys. Use your imagination. Side note, there isn't that much on these guys on the internet. Just a Facebook page called the Hairenyu, which apparently was a pizza-making company, which was shut down in 2019, presumably after someone told them that their company shared a name with a small fish with an uncomfortably sized dick. The last variation of the archetypal mermaid I'd like to cover today are the yak-yaks of Dreamtime mythology, which are shape-shifting water spirits living in watering holes who can and do, on occasion, come to the surface to mate with mortal men, but premeditatively end their engagement by returning to the watering hole from whence they came. Yak-yaks look a lot like any other young woman, except with a scaly underbelly and green algae-like hair. It is said that the yak-yaks were symbols of fertility so strong among the indigenous people of Australia that just walking by a watering hole, a young woman may become pregnant. At least that's a story they tell their parents before the inevitable screaming match and their father looking for the nearest set of stairs to push his daughter down.
I've fallen, and I can't get up!
If you think that joke was too dark, you're obviously new here. So welcome! Hopefully I was able to educate you plenty about these fishwomen. If you are into this sort of content, why not subscribe and donate to my Patreon like these wonderful folks over here. Liking the video and leaving some sort of comment also helps out, no matter how childish and vitriolic it may be. It helps support me in Susan's algorithm anyways, so by all means, please do that and then blow me. Rumor has it that if you like this video, there is a greater than 0% chance that the Hairenyu with a big old floppy cock will appear in your bathtub and make all your sick and twisted fantasies come true. And with that uncomfortable bit of imagery aside, until next time, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, my name is Messiahs of Mythology, and as I always say, have a God's blessed day.